The knock came at sunset when Bennett Granger was halfway through skinning a rabbit for supper, his hands slick with blood, and his mind occupied with nothing more than getting through another lonely evening in his small ranch house outside Williams, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the door, curious who would be visiting at this hour when most folks were settling in for the night. Opening it, he found himself staring at a young woman with tangled dark hair and eyes that spoke of desperation, mixed with determination. Her dress was torn at the hem, dust covered every inch of her, and she looked like she had not eaten a proper meal in days. She could not have been more than 20 years old, maybe younger, though the hardship in her face made it difficult to tell. "I apologize for disturbing you, sir," she said, her voice hoarse. "I saw your light from the road. I am hoping to buy some supplies, just enough to get me to the next town. I have money." She held out a small leather pouch, but Bennett could tell from the way it hung limply that there was not much inside. He looked past her and saw no horse, no wagon, nothing but the empty desert stretching toward the distant mountains. "You walked here. My horse threw a shoe 2 days back. I had to leave him with a farmer about 15 miles south. He said he would tend to him if I paid when I returned, but I need to get to Flagstaff where my aunt lives. She is expecting me." Bennett studied her face, seeing the truth in her eyes along with the exhaustion. Something about her stirred something in his chest that had been dormant for longer than he cared to admit. He stepped back from the doorway. "Put your money away. I will give you what you need." Her eyes widened. "I cannot accept charity. I insist on paying." "It is not charity if I am refusing your money," Bennett said, allowing himself a small smile. "But I do have one condition." Suspicion flickered across her face, and he saw her body tense, preparing to run if necessary. He raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Just your company for supper. I have been alone out here for 3 months, and I would appreciate some conversation with another human being. That is all I ask. After we eat, I will pack you supplies enough to reach Flagstaff, and you can be on your way at first light. You will need rest before attempting that walk anyway." She hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Bennett could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Finally, she nodded. "I am Josephine Kendrick, and I accept your offer, Mr. Bennett Granger. Just Bennett is fine." He stepped aside fully, allowing her to enter. "I have a spare room where you can wash up if you would like. I was just preparing supper, though I will admit my cooking is not much to brag about." Josephine stepped inside, her eyes taking in the modest but clean interior of his home. It was a simple structure with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and 2 smaller rooms branching off to the sides. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything had its place. It was the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. "This is very kind of you," she said softly. "I have been walking since dawn with nothing but a bit of dried meat. I did not realize how far apart everything was out here. Arizona Territory is not forgiving to those unprepared for it," Bennett agreed. "Let me show you where you can clean up, and I will get back to making something edible." He led her to the spare room, which held a simple bed, a small table with a washing basin, and a trunk that contained extra blankets. He poured fresh water into the basin from a pitcher and handed her a clean towel. "Take your time. Supper will be ready in about 30 minutes. When she emerged later, she looked slightly more refreshed, though the exhaustion was still evident. She had washed her face and hands and attempted to tame her hair, pulling it back into a simple braid. Bennett had finished preparing the rabbit along with some beans and fresh bread he had baked that morning. It was simple fare, but it was hot and filling. They sat across from each other at his small wooden table, and for a moment neither spoke, both suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. Finally, Josephine broke the silence. "You said you have been alone for 3 months. Do you live out here by yourself all the time?" Bennett nodded, serving her a generous portion. "I have a small ranch, mostly cattle, some horses. I make enough to get by. I prefer the solitude to town life, though I admit it can get lonely at times." "I can imagine," she said, taking a bite of the food and closing her eyes briefly in appreciation. "This is wonderful, or perhaps I am just that hungry." "Probably a bit of both," Bennett said with a slight smile. "What brings you to Arizona territory?" "You do not sound like you are from around here." "I am from Missouri originally," Josephine explained, her voice taking on a distant quality. "I was living in Santa Fe with my father until he passed away 2 months ago. Fever took him quickly. My aunt in Flagstaff is my only remaining family, and she wrote to me saying I could come live with her. She runs a boarding house there." "I am sorry about your father," Bennett said, and he meant it. He knew what loss felt like. "That is a long journey to make alone." "I had no other choice," she said simply. "I had no money for a stagecoach ticket, and everything we owned had to be sold to pay my father's debts. The horse I mentioned was the last thing of value, and now he is with a farmer who will probably keep him since I have no way to pay what is owed." Bennett felt a pang of sympathy. "You have had a rough time of it." "I suppose I have," she agreed, meeting his eyes. "But I am managing. I am stronger than I look." He believed her. There was a steel in her gaze that spoke of someone who had endured hardship and come through it. They continued eating, the conversation flowing more easily as they grew comfortable with each other. Bennett found himself telling her about his life, how he had come west from Tennessee 5 years ago after his parents died, seeking a fresh start and a different kind of life than the one he had known. "I wanted space," he explained. "Room to breathe and think. In Tennessee, everything was crowded, everyone knowing everyone else's business. Out here, a man can be whoever he chooses to be." "Is it what you hoped?" Josephine asked. Bennett considered the question. "Mostly, though I did not account for how much I would miss simple human connection. I go into Williams once a month for supplies and to sell cattle, but beyond that, I see no one. Some days that is exactly what I want. Other days—" He trailed off, not quite sure how to finish the thought. "Other days you wish you had someone to share it with," Josephine finished for him, understanding in her voice. "Yes," he admitted. "Exactly that." They cleared the dishes together after supper, working in a companionable silence that felt natural despite having just met. When everything was clean and put away, Bennett prepared a pack of supplies for her journey. He included more than she would need: dried beef, hardtack, a canteen he could spare, matches, and a warm blanket. He also added a small knife and a Derringer pistol with ammunition. "I cannot accept the gun," Josephine protested. "That is too much." "A woman traveling alone needs protection," Bennett said firmly. "I have others. This one is older but reliable. Do you know how to shoot?" She nodded reluctantly. "My father taught me when I was younger." "Good. Then take it, and I will sleep better knowing you have some way to defend yourself." Josephine looked at the supplies, then back at him, her eyes glistening slightly. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me at all." Bennett met her gaze steadily. "Because someone should be kind to you. Because you deserve help. And because I would hope if I were in your situation, someone would do the same for me." She wiped at her eyes quickly. "Thank you, Bennett. Truly, I will not forget this." "You should get some rest," he said gently. "You have a long walk ahead of you tomorrow. I will wake you at dawn, and you can have breakfast before you go." She nodded and retreated to the spare room, closing the door softly behind her. Bennett settled into his own room but found sleep elusive. He kept thinking about Josephine, about the curve of her cheek in the lamplight, The way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the quiet strength she carried despite her circumstances. He told himself he was being foolish, that she would leave in the morning and he would likely never see her again, but the thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. Dawn came too quickly. Bennett rose and prepared breakfast, making extra coffee and frying eggs with some salt pork. When Josephine emerged, she looked better rested but somber, clearly not looking forward to the journey ahead. They ate together one more time, the conversation lighter now, both avoiding the fact that she would soon be leaving. When the meal was finished and the sun was fully up, Bennett walked her outside with her pack of supplies. "Follow the road north," he instructed. "Stay close to it even when it seems to wander. Flagstaff is about 30 miles from here. If you walk steadily and rest when you need to, you should make it in 2 days, maybe 3. There is a trading post about halfway. Tell them Bennett Granger sent you, and they will let you fill your canteen and rest in the shade." "I will," she promised, shouldering the pack. It was heavy with supplies, but she did not complain. "I do not know how to properly thank you." "You already did by sharing supper and conversation," Bennett said. Then, before he could stop himself, he added, "If things do not work out with your aunt, you are welcome to come back here. I could use help around the ranch, and I would pay fair wages plus room and board." Josephine looked surprised, then thoughtful. "That is a generous offer." "I mean it," he said, and realized he truly did. The thought of her leaving felt wrong somehow, though he could not explain why. "I know we have just met, but I am a good judge of character, and I think you are someone worth knowing better." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her tired face into something beautiful. "You are an unusual man, Bennett Granger. Most would not be so trusting." "Perhaps that makes me a fool," he admitted. "But I prefer to believe the best in people until they prove otherwise." "I think that makes you something rare and valuable," she said softly. Then, before he could respond, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek quickly. "Thank you for everything." She turned and started walking north along the road, the pack on her back and her head held high. Bennett watched until she disappeared from view, then stood there a while longer, his hand touching the spot where her lips had brushed his skin. The days that followed were harder than Bennett expected. He threw himself into his work, mending fences, tending to his small herd, and working on repairs to the barn that he had been putting off for months. But his mind kept drifting back to Josephine, wondering if she had made it to Flagstaff safely, if her aunt had welcomed her warmly, if she ever thought about the night she spent at his ranch. A week passed, then 2. Bennett made his monthly trip into Williams for supplies, half hoping he might hear some news of her, but no one knew anything about a young woman traveling to Flagstaff. He told himself it was for the best, that she was starting her new life and he should focus on his own, but the house felt emptier than it ever had before. It was a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks after Josephine had left when Bennett heard a horse approaching. He was working in the corral, training a young mare, and he wiped the sweat from his brow as he walked toward the front of the house to see who was visiting. His heart seemed to stop when he saw her. Josephine sat atop a chestnut mare, looking healthier and more rested than when he had last seen her. She wore a new dress, simple but clean, and her hair was neatly braided. When she saw him, her face broke into a smile that made the Arizona sun seem dim by comparison. "Hello, Bennett," she called out as she dismounted. "I hope your offer still stands." He could not help the grin that spread across his face. "What happened with your aunt?" "Oh, she is wonderful," Josephine said, walking toward him leading the horse. "She welcomed me with open arms, gave me a room and offered me work at the boarding house. It was everything I could have hoped for." "Then why are you here?" Bennett asked, though his heart was already providing the answer. Josephine stopped a few feet away from him, her expression becoming serious. "Because I have not stopped thinking about you since I left. Because in that one evening, I felt more at home and more myself than I have in months. Because you gave me supplies when I needed them and asked for nothing but my company, and that meant more to me than you could possibly know." She paused, taking a breath. "Because I think I might be falling in love with you, and I needed to come back and see if you might feel the same way." Bennett closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. "I have been miserable since you left. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that we barely know each other, but none of that seemed to matter. Yes, Josephine, I feel the same way." He kissed her then, gentle and searching, and she responded by wrapping her arms around his neck, the horse's reins falling from her hand. The kiss deepened, speaking of loneliness ending and new beginnings and the promise of something neither of them had dared hope for. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Josephine laughed. "My aunt thinks I am insane. I told her about you, about your offer, and she said I should at least wait a few months before making such a big decision. But I could not wait, I had to know." "I am glad you did not wait," Bennett said, running his thumb along her cheek. "These past 3 weeks have been the longest of my life." "So I can stay?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I meant what I said about working. I do not expect anything from you except the chance to be near you and see where this leads." "You can stay as long as you want," Bennett assured her. "And if you want to work the ranch with me, I will be grateful for the help and the company. But Josephine, I need you to know something. My feelings for you are real and they are strong, but I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated. We can take this as slow as you need." "I do not want slow," she said, smiling up at him. "I have had enough of uncertainty and hardship. I want to build something real with someone who sees me as I am and values that. I want to wake up every morning knowing I am exactly where I should be. And I think that place is here, with you." Bennett kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the promise between them. Then he took the horse's reins and led both Josephine and the mare toward the corral. "Where did you get the horse?" "My aunt bought her for me," Josephine explained. "She said every woman in Arizona Territory needs her own horse, and she insisted I take her. Her name is Copper." "Your aunt sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Josephine agreed. "And she made me promise to bring you to meet her properly within the month. She wants to make sure you are good enough for me." "I will do my best to make a good impression," Bennett said seriously, though his eyes sparkled with humor. "Though I am not sure I am good enough for you by any measure." "You are exactly good enough," Josephine said firmly. "You are kind and generous and honest, and you saw me when I was at my lowest and treated me with respect and compassion. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." They spent the rest of the afternoon settling Copper into the corral with Bennett's horses and bringing Josephine's few belongings into the house. She insisted on taking the spare room again, wanting to maintain some propriety even though they had declared their feelings. Bennett respected that, understanding that some things were worth waiting for and doing properly. Over the following days and weeks, they fell into a rhythm together. Josephine proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, taking to ranch life with an enthusiasm that both surprised and delighted Bennett. She learned to rope cattle, mend fences, and handle the horses with confidence. In the evenings, they would cook together, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and different perspectives that complemented rather than clashed. Bennett found himself falling more deeply in love with her with each passing day. It was not just her beauty, though he found her lovely, but the way she laughed at his bad jokes, the fierce determination she brought to every task, the gentle way she handled the animals, and the comfortable silence they could share while working side by side. She fit into his life as though she had always been meant to be there. Josephine felt the same way. She loved the way Bennett always made sure she had the easier tasks when she was tired, how he never talked down to her, even when explaining something new, the way his face lit up when he saw her each morning. She loved his quiet strength, his dry sense of humor, and the way he made her feel safe and valued. She had never expected to find this kind of connection, especially not so quickly, but she was not about to question the gift that fate had given her. One evening about 6 weeks after Josephine's return, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Bennett had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaned against his side, both of them tired from a long day but content. "I need to ask you something," Bennett said, his voice nervous in a way she had not heard before. Josephine turned to look at him, seeing the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" "I know we have not been together very long," he began, "and maybe by some people's standards this is too soon, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Josephine, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this ranch together, making a home and maybe a family. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Bennett. I love you too, more than I thought possible to love someone." He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple but beautiful, a thin gold band with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for when I found the right woman. I think she would have loved you." "It is perfect," Josephine whispered as he slipped it onto her finger, "and I wish I could have met her." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, sealing their engagement with the promise of forever. The next day, they rode into Williams together to speak with the local minister about arranging a wedding. Reverend Thomas was a kind, older man who agreed to perform the ceremony in 2 weeks' time, giving them enough time to send word to Josephine's aunt and make basic preparations. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. They cleaned the house from top to bottom. Bennett built a new bed frame for what would become their shared room, and Josephine made new curtains and bedspreads. Her aunt arrived 3 days before the wedding, bringing with her several women from Flagstaff who had befriended Josephine during her brief stay there. They brought gifts and helped with preparations, turning Bennett's simple ranch house into something festive and warm. Bennett liked Josephine's Aunt Margaret immediately. She was a shrewd woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, but she was also warm and funny, and it was clear she loved her niece deeply. Margaret pulled Bennett aside the evening before the wedding. "I want you to know," she said seriously, "that Josephine is very precious to me. She has been through a great deal of loss and hardship in her young life. If you ever give me reason to believe you are not treating her as she deserves, you will answer to me." "I understand," Bennett said, meeting her eyes steadily. "And I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure she knows how loved and valued she is. She is the best thing that has ever happened to me." Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. "I believe you. And I can see how much she loves you. That girl has not stopped smiling since she came back from visiting you that first time. I knew then that she had found something special." The wedding took place on a beautiful October morning in 1882. It was a simple ceremony held in the small church in Williams, attended by a handful of friends and neighbors. Josephine wore a cream-colored dress that Margaret had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Bennett wore his best suit, feeling stiff and formal but not caring because of the way Josephine looked at him. As they stood before Reverend Thomas and spoke their vows, Bennett felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was what he had been searching for when he came west, though he had not known it at the time. Not just land and freedom, but someone to share it with, someone who understood him and chose him anyway. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Bennett kissed his bride, there was a small cheer from their guests. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing in the church hall. Bennett, who claimed he could not dance, found himself swaying with Josephine in his arms, not caring about the steps or the music, only the feel of her close to him, and the knowledge that she was his wife. That night, after all the guests had departed and they had returned to the ranch, Bennett carried Josephine over the threshold of their home. He set her down gently in what was now their shared bedroom, his hands trembling slightly with nerves and anticipation. "Are you scared?" Josephine asked softly, reaching up to touch his face. "A little," Bennett admitted. "I want everything to be perfect for you." "It already is," she assured him. "Because I am with you and you are with me, and that is all that matters." They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts in the intimacy of marriage. It was awkward in moments, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful and meaningful, a physical expression of the love and commitment they had spoken in their vows. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Josephine's head on Bennett's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I cannot believe this is real sometimes," she murmured. "That I came to your door that night asking to buy supplies, and you gave them to me freely and asked only for my company. It changed everything." "I am glad you knocked on my door," Bennett said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I am even more glad you came back." "You are my miracle, Josephine Granger." "I like the sound of that name," she said, smiling in the darkness. "Josephine Granger. It sounds like someone who belongs here, who has found her place in the world." "You do belong here," Bennett assured her. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." The months that followed were some of the happiest either of them had known. They worked the ranch together, building their herd and making improvements to the property. Bennett taught Josephine everything he knew about cattle and horses, and she proved to be an eager and capable student. They made trips into Williams together, and Josephine began to form friendships with other women in the area, while Bennett strengthened his business relationships with local ranchers and merchants. Winter came, bringing cold nights and occasional snow, but they stayed warm together, spending the long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. They discussed their dreams for the future, plans to expand the ranch, possibly building a bigger house someday when they needed more room. It was in early spring that Josephine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Bennett. When she finally shared the news one morning over breakfast, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face went from confusion to understanding to pure joy in the span of seconds, and then he was pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, pulling back to look at her face as if to confirm it was true. "Yes," she said, smiling through her own tears. "In the fall, I think." "Are you happy?" "Happy," Bennett repeated, shaking his head in wonder. "Josephine, I did not think I could be any happier than I already was, but you keep proving me wrong. I love you so much, and I already love this baby we made together." He spent the rest of the day treating her like she was made of glass, which she found both endearing and frustrating. Finally, she had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not dying, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities, at least for now. "I just want to take care of you," Bennett protested. "Both of you." "And you do," Josephine assured him. "Every single day." but you also need to trust me to know my own limits. I promise I will not take unnecessary risks, but I also will not spend the next 6 months sitting in a chair doing nothing." Bennett agreed, though Josephine noticed he still watched her carefully, always ready to step in if she showed any sign of discomfort or fatigue. She found his protectiveness sweet, even when it bordered on excessive. As summer arrived and Josephine's belly began to swell with their growing child, they prepared for the arrival. Bennett built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. Josephine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the baby she had not yet met. Margaret visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice, making sure Josephine was healthy and that Bennett was not driving her crazy with his hovering. She arranged for a midwife from Flagstaff to come stay with them as Josephine's time grew near. In late September, on a cool evening with the first hints of autumn in the air, Josephine went into labor. Bennett was terrified, pacing the main room while the midwife and Margaret attended to Josephine in the bedroom. He could hear her cries of pain and felt utterly helpless, wishing he could take the burden from her. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. When Bennett was finally allowed into the room, he found Josephine exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Bennett, come meet your son." Their son. The words hit him with the force of a lightning bolt. Bennett approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a tuft of dark hair, and his eyes were closed, his small mouth working as he settled against his mother's chest. "He is perfect," Bennett whispered, reaching out to gently touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb instinctively, and Bennett felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking William," Josephine said softly. "After the town where we were married, William Bennett Granger, if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Bennett said, leaning down to kiss first his wife and then his son's forehead. "William Bennett Granger, welcome to the world, son." The months that followed were challenging as they adjusted to life with a newborn, but they were also filled with profound joy. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching him grow and change brought Bennett and Josephine closer together. They took turns walking with him when he was fussy at night, and they marveled together over every small milestone. His first smile, the way he learned to track them with his eyes, the strength of his grip. Bennett was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son. He would talk to William as he did his chores, telling him about the ranch and the animals, his plans for the future. Josephine would watch them together, her heart full, thinking about how far they had both come from that first night when she had knocked on his door. As William grew into a toddler and then a young boy, the ranch prospered. Bennett's careful management and hard work, combined with Josephine's capable assistance, allowed them to expand their herd and improve their land. They built a larger house, one with enough room for their growing family and the additional children they hoped to have. When William was 3, Josephine gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth. The birth was easier than her first, and Bennett handled having 3 children with only slightly more panic than he had shown with one. The twins were different from the start, Sarah adventurous and bold, Elizabeth quieter and more thoughtful, but both were loved fiercely. The ranch house was always full of noise and activity now, with children playing and growing, learning to ride horses and help with the animals. Bennett taught William how to rope and ride, while Josephine taught all 3 children to read and write, determined they would have the education she and Bennett had not always had access to. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Bennett and Josephine would sit on the porch as they had years before, his arm around her shoulders, watching the sunset. They would talk about their day, their children, their dreams, and always they would marvel at how blessed they were. "Do you ever think about that night?" Josephine asked one evening when they had been married nearly 8 years. "When I knocked on your door asking to buy supplies." "I think about it often," Bennett admitted. "I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If I had been in town that day, or if you had chosen a different road, or if I had simply sold you the supplies and sent you on your way." "But you did not," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "You gave me the supplies free and asked for my company. You saw me as a person worthy of kindness, not just a transaction to be completed. That changed my life." "It changed both our lives," Bennett corrected. "You gave me something I did not even know I was missing. You made this house a home, gave me children, built a life with me. Everything good in my world started the moment you knocked on that door." "I fell in love with you that first night," Josephine confessed. "I did not realize it then, or maybe I did not want to admit it to myself. But when I left the next morning, I felt like I was leaving part of myself behind. That is why I had to come back." "I am grateful every day that you did," Bennett said, turning to kiss her softly. "I love you, Josephine, more now than ever if that is possible." "It is possible," she assured him, "because I feel the same way. You are my home, Bennett. You and our children and this life we have built. I would not change a single thing." As the years continued to pass, their love only deepened. They faced challenges, as all families do. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when water was scarce, and the everyday struggles of raising children and maintaining a ranch. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories as a team. William grew into a fine young man, responsible and hardworking like his father, with his mother's kind heart. At 19, he began courting a young woman from Williams, the daughter of the general store owner, and Bennett and Josephine watched with knowing smiles, remembering their own young love. The twins were 15 now, both beautiful and spirited. Sarah talked about becoming a teacher, while Elizabeth dreamed of breeding horses. Bennett and Josephine encouraged both dreams, knowing their daughters could achieve anything they set their minds to. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett surprised Josephine with a trip to Flagstaff, just the two of them, leaving the children in Margaret's capable care. They stayed in a nice hotel and ate in restaurants and walked through the town holding hands like newlyweds. On their last evening, they returned to the boarding house where Josephine had briefly stayed all those years ago. "You remember when you left here to come back to me?" Bennett asked as they stood outside the building in the twilight. "Your aunt said you were crazy for making such a quick decision." "I remember," Josephine said, smiling at the memory. "And she was probably right. It was crazy and impulsive and completely unlike me, but it was also the best decision I ever made." "I have something for you," Bennett said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box, carved from the same oak he had used for William's cradle. "I made this myself." Josephine opened it to find a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs, one of Bennett and one of their 3 children together. "So you always have us close to your heart," Bennett explained. "Though I know you do anyway." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as she lifted the locket out and let Bennett fasten it around her neck. "It is beautiful, thank you. I will treasure it always." 20 years, Bennett said, shaking his head in wonder. 20 years since you came to my door. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have been with me forever." "Both are true," Josephine said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Every day with you feels new and exciting, but you also feel like the most natural, essential part of my life. Like breathing." They kissed there in the fading light. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. When they returned home, they found their children had organized a surprise party for them, inviting neighbors and friends to celebrate their anniversary. The house was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and tables were laden with food. Margaret was there, of course, older now but still sharp and loving. Friends from Williams and surrounding ranches had come to honor the couple known for their kindness and strong marriage. As Bennett and Josephine stood together accepting congratulations and well wishes, surrounded by their children and friends in the home they had built, they both felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the life they had created from a single act of kindness and a shared meal on a lonely evening. The years continued to unfold gently. William married his sweetheart in a beautiful ceremony, and 2 years later, Bennett and Josephine became grandparents for the first time when William's wife gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Holding his granddaughter, Bennett felt the circle of life complete itself in a satisfying way. Sarah did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Williams and boarding during the week with Margaret, who was still running her boarding house at 70. Elizabeth married a horse breeder from a neighboring ranch and started her own breeding program with her father's encouragement and support. As Bennett and Josephine grew older, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to William, who had moved back to the family ranch with his wife and daughter. But they still took their evening walks together, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still shared the quiet intimacy of two people who knew each other completely and loved what they knew. On a warm summer evening when they had been married for 32 years, they sat together on that same porch, their hands intertwined. Their granddaughter was playing in the yard while William and his wife prepared supper inside. The sound of family and life filled the air. "I have been thinking," Josephine said, her hair now more gray than dark, but her eyes still bright with the same intelligence and humor Bennett had fallen in love with. "About everything that had to happen for us to be here right now. My father dying, though I still miss him. Losing everything we had. My horse throwing that shoe, seeing your light from the road, all of it had to happen exactly as it did." "Do you wish any of it had been different?" Bennett asked, though he knew the answer. "Not a single moment," Josephine said firmly. "Because it all led me to you, to this life, to our children and now our grandchildren. The pain and hardship were worth it for what came after." "I feel the same way," Bennett agreed, "though I wish I could have spared you the pain. But pain is what taught me to recognize joy when I found it," Josephine said. "It taught me to be grateful for what I have and to fight for what matters. You were worth fighting for, Bennett. This life was worth fighting for." Bennett lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You are the bravest person I know. Coming to a stranger's door when you were desperate and alone, then choosing to come back when you could have stayed safely with your aunt. Trusting me with your heart and your future. Building a life in this harsh land, raising our children to be good people. All of it took courage. We did it together," Josephine corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you beside me." "We are a good team," Bennett agreed. "The best team," Josephine said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, the same show they had watched countless times over the decades. But it never got old, just as their love for each other never diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger with time, weathered by challenges and enriched by shared experiences. Their granddaughter ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Grandma, Grandpa, come see what I found." They rose together, still holding hands, and followed her into the yard to admire whatever treasure she had discovered. This was their legacy, Bennett thought. Not just the ranch or the land, but the love they had built and passed down to their children and grandchildren. A love that started with a knock on a door and a simple act of kindness. As the years advanced further, Bennett and Josephine remained devoted to each other even as their bodies aged. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by not only their 3 children, but also 6 grandchildren, with a 7th on the way. The ranch that had once been Bennett's solitary refuge was now a thriving family operation, with William running the day-to-day operations and his sisters contributing in their own ways. Margaret had passed away peacefully at the age of 78, and Josephine had mourned deeply for the aunt who had been her last connection to her childhood. But she had Bennett beside her through the grief, just as he had been beside her through everything else. When Bennett turned 65, he finally admitted that the physical work of ranching was becoming too much for him. William had long been ready to take full ownership, and the transfer was made official with the understanding that Bennett and Josephine would always have a home there for as long as they lived. But giving up the daily operations gave them something they had not had in decades: time. Time to sit and talk without rushing off to the next chore. Time to take long rides together through the land they loved. Time to visit their daughters and spoil their grandchildren. Time to simply be together without the weight of responsibility. One fall afternoon, very similar to that day 45 years earlier when Josephine had gone into labor with William, they decided to ride out to a spot they both loved, a small rise that overlooked the ranch and offered a view of the mountains in the distance. They were both still capable riders, though they moved more slowly now. They sat on a blanket on the hillside, a picnic lunch spread between them, though neither was very hungry. They were content to just sit and enjoy the view and each other's company. "You have any regrets?" Bennett asked, breaking the peaceful silence. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "I wish I had known my father longer. I wish I could have introduced him to you and our children. I wish I had been able to pursue more education when I was young." Small things like that. But the big decisions, the important choices, no, I would make them all again exactly the same way. Even marrying a poor cowboy who lived alone in the middle of nowhere, Bennett asked with a slight smile. "Especially that," Josephine said firmly. "That poor cowboy gave me everything that mattered. Love, family, security, partnership. He gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "I am glad," Bennett said, "because you gave me the same. I was so lonely before you came along, and I did not even realize how lonely until you were there. And then when you left that first time, I knew. I knew what I had been missing all those years." "Company," Josephine said, echoing that first conversation. "You asked for my company." "Best decision I ever made," Bennett confirmed. "Well, second best. The best was convincing you to come back and marry me. You did not have to convince me very hard," Josephine reminded him with a laugh. "I was already halfway in love with you." They lay back on the blanket together, looking up at the vast blue sky, their fingers intertwined. Birds called in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled through the grass around them. It was a perfect moment, the kind that seems to exist outside of time. "I love you, Josephine Granger," Bennett said, turning his head to look at her. "I have loved you since the moment I opened my door and saw you standing there looking so fierce and determined despite being exhausted and alone. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Bennett," Josephine replied, meeting his eyes. "You saved my life that night, though I did not know it then, not just by giving me supplies, but by giving me hope, by treating me like I mattered. And then you gave me a reason to live fully, to build something beautiful. You are my heart." They kissed softly, a gentle affirmation of decades of love and commitment. Then they lay together under the open sky, talking about their children and grandchildren, remembering favorite moments from their life together, dreaming about what the future might hold for their growing family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and purple, they packed up their picnic and rode slowly back to the ranch house. Smoke rose from the chimney where William's wife was preparing supper, and they could hear the sounds of children playing, their grandchildren's laughter carrying on the evening air. "This is what happiness looks like," Josephine said as they approached the house. "This exact moment, this exact place, with you beside me." "I could not agree more," Bennett said. They lived several more good years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They celebrated births and weddings, comforted through losses and disappointments, and provided the steady foundation of love and wisdom that comes from a long, successful marriage. When Bennett was 72, he developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor in Williams said it was his lungs, weakened from years of dust and hard work. He prescribed rest and medicine, but both Bennett and Josephine knew the truth. His body was simply wearing out. Josephine nursed him tenderly through his final months, never leaving his side for long. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently, and Bennett was able to say his goodbyes and share his final wisdom with each of them. He told William he was proud of the man he had become and the way he was running the ranch. He told Sarah and Elizabeth they had made their own marks on the world and should be proud. He told his grandchildren to be kind, to work hard, and to value family above all else. But most of his remaining time and energy he saved for Josephine. They talked about their life together, remembering both the joys and the challenges, the way they had supported each other through everything. They talked about what came after, and Bennett made Josephine promise she would not mourn too long. "You have more life to live," he told her, his voice weak but earnest. "More grandchildren to meet, more sunsets to see. Promise me you will keep living fully." "I promise," Josephine said through her tears. "But Bennett, I do not know how to be in this world without you." "You will figure it out," he assured her, squeezing her hand with what strength he had left. "You are the strongest person I know, and I will always be with you, watching over you and our family." "I love you," Josephine said, her voice breaking. "I have loved you for 47 years, and I will love you for however many more I have." "I love you too," Bennett whispered. "Thank you for knocking on my door that night. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for choosing me and building this life with me. You made everything worthwhile." Bennett passed away peacefully in their bed on a quiet spring morning, Josephine holding his hand just as she had held it countless times throughout their marriage. She was devastated by the loss, feeling like part of her own soul had been torn away, but she kept her promise to him. She continued to live, to be present for her children and grandchildren, to find joy even in her grief. The family gathered for Bennett's funeral, which was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona territory. He had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him, and person after person came forward to share stories of his kindness, his integrity, and his devotion to his family. As Josephine stood by his grave on the ranch he had loved, surrounded by the family they had created together, she felt a strange mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the loss, yes, but gratitude for every moment they had been given together. Not everyone got to experience a love like theirs, a partnership so complete and fulfilling. She lived another 8 years after Bennett's death, years filled with her children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. She told their story often to anyone who would listen, wanting to preserve the memory of the man she had loved and the life they had built. She wanted her descendants to know that it all started with one act of kindness, one offer of free supplies and a request for company. When Josephine finally passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by her loving family, her last thoughts were of Bennett. She imagined him waiting for her, young and strong again, ready to take her hand and lead her into whatever came next. And she was not afraid, because she was going to be with her husband again, her partner, her love. They buried her next to Bennett on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same spot where they had shared that picnic so many years before. Their headstone was simple but meaningful, bearing both their names and a single line that William had chosen. She came to his door. He gave her his heart. The ranch continued to thrive under William's management, and he passed it down to his own children in time, just as Bennett had passed it to him. The story of Bennett and Josephine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what love could be when nurtured and valued. The house Bennett had built, and that he and Josephine had expanded, was preserved and maintained, becoming the heart of the family compound that developed over the years. In the main room, now used for family gatherings, hung a large photograph of Bennett and Josephine taken on their 40th anniversary, both of them smiling at each other rather than at the camera, lost in their own world as they so often were. Descendants would look at that photograph and see the love so clearly visible in their expressions, and they would understand that they came from something special. They came from a love that started with kindness, grew through companionship, and lasted beyond death itself. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, family members still sitting on that porch watching the sunset would swear they could feel Bennett and Josephine there with them, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching over the family they had created and the legacy they had built from a single knock on a door so many years ago.